Shalom, everyone. This discussion is dedicated to the question of doing Kiddush or praying Arvit early on Erev Shavuot, especially this year, especially in Europe. Shabbat starts very late. Those who delay Arvit and Kiddush until after sunset make it very difficult for families, for anyone, to enjoy the Hag. So I'll start before going into the Mekorot, into the sources. Say very clear, very briefly, that there is no problem to start Shavuot early, to do Tefillah early, to do Kiddush early, and have the Seudah. This I know from my grandfather, Hacham Shaul Ftay Alav Shalom, that despite being Bavli, Baghdadi, and knowing the Minhagim of Ben Ish Hai, always told me that we do not do that. We don't have to wait for Laila Vadai, and that was the minhag of his father, Hacham Yudaftaya Bal Minhat Yehuda. And also, this is ruled by Rabbi David Zvi Hoffman in Melamed Le'oil, Rabbi Ephraim Laniado in his Shut Dekel Mahane Ephraim, Sefer Bnei Tzion, and the Yabet. They all say there's no room for this minhag. One can, not only can start Kiddush and Tefillah and Kiddush early, but also it's recommended because your Zariz Niskar, you bring Yom Tov earlier, you do Tosefet, you add from the hall, from the mundane over to the Kadosh, to the holy. And as we shall see, this minhag is really what is called mehudash. It's innovated. It never existed. It is not to be found in the Talmud, in the Poskim, Rambam, Tur, Shulchan Aruch. No one mentions it. It is first mentioned in a reference that goes back to Rabbi Yaakov Polak, known as Baal HaChilukim, who lived in Poland in the 15th century. So for this show, I'm going to use an excellent article by Rabbi Avigdor Berger that appears in Zachor LaAvraham, in a periodical called Zachor LaAvraham. I'm going to just highlight several of the important things that he says to show how problematic is the claim that one should not pray early on Erev Shabbat, on Erev Shavuot. So first, the original quote, the Shla, Rabbi Yishaya Levi Horowitz of Prague, 17th century, quotes his master, Marshal of Lublin, Poland, 16th century, who had a oral tradition up to Rabbi Yaakov Polak, who lived in Lublin, Poland, 15th century, 15th and 16th century, that one should not do Kiddush and eat until Tzet HaKochavim, till it's for sure a night. So note, all these discussion, all these testimonies are from Prague and Poland in the 16th, from the 15th to the 16th century. They just go around certain circles within the same circle of scholars. There's no source before the Marshal of Lublin, before Rabbi Yaakov Polak, and the Shla goes on to say, don't raise a question by the fact that we pray Arvit early, meaning that when the minhag was created, it was only about Kiddush and not about Tefillah. And he says it's okay to pray early. This is mentioned in the Talmud. Also, says the Shla, don't ask questions regarding the Kiddush that is done in the synagogue according to Ashkenazim. Kiddush is done in the synagogue. He says this is not a problem because the Kiddush is only to cover for the guests, but you don't accept Shabbat. You don't take away from the whole Sfirah that we say Sheva Shabbatot Mimot, wholesome, 7 wholesome weeks. Problem with this argument is that Shulchan Aruch in chapter 261, 4, Siman Shulchan Aruch Or Haim Resh Samech Aleph Daled, writes very clearly that Shabbat starts with Baruch Hu. When you go to Shul, you say the Tefillah, you say Baruch Hu, it's Kabbalat Shabbat. Similarly on Shavuot, if you did Tefillah, you're Mekabel Chag HaShavuot, so you cannot pray early. But still, in the original minhag, it was only about Kiddush and not about Tefillah. The Basad Binyamin, Rabbi Binyamin Aaron Selnik of Poland, again, Poland, 16th, 17th century, says that you have to wait for Kiddush. And we'll see what happens later on is that in every generation, they quote the previous rabbis. But nobody bothers to go beyond the Rabbi Yaakov Polak and ask, where did you take it from? So the Magen Avraham now quotes the Shla and the Masad Binyamin. Ve'ilu Ataz, David Segal, the author of the Taz, who lived also in Poland in the 16th and 17th century, writes, Katav lelo mekorot, without quoting any source, that you also have to pray Arvit late. The author of Eliyahu Zuta and Eliyahu Rabba, Rabbi Shapiro, questions the Taz. He says, Muchach shegam tfilat Arvit yitpalu mukdam. It says, from even the Shla, who says to delay the Kiddush, agrees that you pray Arvit early, and he concludes, Tzarich ayun. I'm not clear on that, meaning I cannot understand the Taz. So, it's a new minhag, originally just Kiddush, and then the Taz adds Arvit, but there's a question on regarding the Taz, how can you delay Arvit? Rabbi Berger, the author, also quotes Gemara Meforeshet Neged Chidusho Shel HaNatziv, that there's a statement in Talmud that disagrees with the Natziv. The Natziv tries to explain how why we have to delay the Kiddush. Anyway, we'll put this aside. More important is that the Ramban, one of the Rishonim, writes clearly, Guf hayom hu kadosh ve'asur ba'asiyat melacha ve'einenu talui ba'omer ve'lo b'korbanot. The day itself is holy. The 50th day is holy. It doesn't need you to make it kadosh. It does not depend on the omer. It does not depend on the korbanot. So whether you counted the omer or not, let's say if all of Am Yisrael would not count the omer, still Chag HaShavuot will be kadosh. So that's the opinion of the Ramban. Now the author brings the question of the Natziv, another question, says if the reason for delaying Kiddush on Erev Shavuot is to have a wholesome day, right, to count a full day, a 24 hours day, we should say it about every night between Pesach and Shavuot, because we need it to be complete, right? So according to that, you would have to start let's say counting the first night after Pesach at 10 p.m. and keep counting every night exactly 10 p.m. to have a full cycle of 24 hours. But the answer is very interesting. It's sort of a contortionist answer. He says, since, here I'm translating this, if we count a little before nightfall, the previous day is shorter. If we count after nightfall, the next day will be shorter. So one of them will take something from the next day, right? Because there's Ben Hashmashot, there's the twilight time. So he says, since we cannot have 24-hour day, a complete day for the 48 or 49 first days of the Sfirah, so it doesn't matter if we count it a little later or a little earlier. So in other words, he says it's impossible to have Tamimot. And therefore, it doesn't matter when you do it. So why did the Torah write that you have to have Tamimot? So problem. Put it aside. We're just accumulating more problems regarding that minhag of praying and doing Kiddush late. Then Binyan Shlomo, who lived in Lithuania in the 20th century, asked this question: if you don't do Kiddush until after Tzedek Kochavim, that means that you don't do the mitzvah of Tosefet Hora LaKodesh, to add from the mundane to the holy. We always want to extend Shabbat and Hag a little bit on both ends. And he writes, I do not understand what the Shelah right. And we know that we have to add Me'achor ala Kodesh, and there's no distinction between Shavuot and other holidays. Then he says, I could prove, I could support the Shlah's argument from the Torah, but then he scales back. He says, I cannot do it. Why? Because his interpretation here is based on something in the style of Midrash Halacha. And the rule is you don't do Midrash Halacha after the time of the Talmud. So there's no proof, there's nothing to support the argument of not doing Tosefet Yom Tov on Shavuot. Then he interprets in a different way, but again he uses a sort of a Midrash Halacha on a pasuk, which we cannot do. So bottom line, we say that this question of Tosefet Yom Tov min Torah lo nidbe'er landin zeh. We don't have a good explanations for that. Rabbi Moshe Sternbuch, who keeps on with this question, also is a 20th century posek, says that the reason we don't add of the mundane from the mundane to the holy on Erev Shavuot is that Shavuot doesn't have a date in the Torah, and therefore it doesn't become Shavuot until Tzat HaKochavim. And he says, Lo shayach hefza de Chag HaShavuot. There's no object of Shavuot. Sorry to say, but this Shavuot is not sufficient. Chag HaShavuot is not an object. It's an abstract concept. It's a date. And if the Torah said it's going to be the 50th day after Pesach, it does not depend on what we do. When it will be a holiday, no matter what. And since it is a holiday, we have to do Tosefet. No one really provides a good explanation. He tries to bring another explanation. Maybe we could say that, but then he says haleta. It is not. It's not valid. And then there's another question. It is really a wonder that women light candles early and say Shehayanu. When they light early, they usher in the holiday Shavuot before sunset, and definitely before night. How can they do that? And he says, we really should have told them not to say Shehayanu. So here we have a contradiction between the popular minhag that pre-existed the minhag of Rav Yaakov Polak, not by much, by a couple hundred of years, but still an earlier minhag where women do say Shehayanu early when they light the candles. I'll skip. There's another explanation why to delay Arvit. It is problematic. I explained it in the clip in Hebrew, and those who are interested are welcome to contact me through the website of Sephardi Q. You can see the name here on my screen, or look for my name in Sepharia and communicate with me, and I'll send you the materials and answer questions with pleasure. Here, Rabbi Berger quotes the Haronim, the later poskim who agree with the Taz, which, as I said before, still it's all of these poskim are all people who line up after Rabbi Yaakov Polak, after the Marshal of Lublin, and after the Shla. They all trace back to one person in Poland of the 16th century who introduced this minhag. He introduced another famous minhag, the Tashlich, also his. And it's interesting how from that little enclave, it spread to the whole world in the way that now no one remembers what it was. What was the halacha before that? So I'll skip that part because there are several poskim who follow the Taz, and we'll go to those who disagree with the Taz. And first, very important evidence, very important testimony is that of Yosef Ometz. Yosef Ometz is a book of Minhagim written by Rabbi Yosef Fehan Neuerlingen of Frankfurt, who lived in the 16th and 17th centuries, you can see here. And he was a Talmid Chacham and Avbedin of Frankfurt. So, and he quotes Rav Yeshaya Segal, who was also an Avbedin of Frankfurt. And he knows of this tradition of the Maharshal Milublin and the Gaon Rabbi Yaakov Polak, that people delay the Kiddush and delay the Kiddush, not the Tefillah. Back then it was only the Kiddush, until nightfall. And he says, Lo ra'iti Rabbanan keshishe ba'alei ma'aseh asher b'artzenu eretz Ashkenaz da'avdei achi. I have never seen any of the older rabbis, the veterans, those who know the halacha, know the minhagim, and they are ba'alei ma'aseh, the pious people in Germany. No one does that. So we have a testimony from the 1600s, about 100 years after the minhag was invented by Rabbi Yaakov Polak, saying very clearly, no one does it in Germany. No one does it. Especially, he says, those people who learn all night, they for sure start the tefillah early because they have a lot to learn and the nights are short. And if they will delay with the kiddush and would not eat until nightfall, and they will spend some time eating because they have to rejoice in the holiday, it will be midnight. Sunset this year in parts of Europe, I know for sure in Barcelona, people ask me, is around 11 p.m. So by the time you finish the tefillah and the kiddush and the food and the meal, it will be midnight. When will they dedicate time to the eternal home, the Limud Torah? It says, therefore, one should do kiddush. Here he says ben hashmashot, twilight, but other poskim say that you can do even earlier, like Ya'abetz. Ya'abet says, those who said that you have to wait with the tefillah, dikduk kalush mechodash mahronim. It is baseless, and it was invented by recent poskim. He knows that they lived about 200 years before him. He says, he who prays early and added from the mundane to the holy, he is zariz v'niskar. That means that he's expeditious and he will be rewarded for doing the mitzvah. And he will have both mitzvot of Shavuot and of the tefillah. He says, even those who say that you have to delay your actions on Erev Shavuot only say it about the food, about the meal, not about the tefillah. But Degel Mahane Ephraim, Rabbi Ephraim Laniado, who lived in the 18th century, writes even more harshly. When he quotes the Mas'ed Binyamin, who quotes the Maharshal Milublin and all the poskim from Poland, he says, Lo matzati mi shediber beze leshum echad ma'poskim. None of the important poskim spoke about that, except Knesset Gedolah, Rabbi Haim Ovadia of Izmir does speak about that. But more important than the poskim is this: Lo matzanu lo b'Gemara velo b'Rishonim she'asru ze. There's no source in the Talmud, in the Rishonim. Not only that, they did forbid Ela Belel Pesach. The Talmud says on El Pesach you should wait until nightfall. And if it were true that on Shavuot you also have to wait for nightfall, why did you say that? The Talmud had a perfect opportunity to say on El Pesach you have to wait till nightfall, and so also on El Shavuot. And if they did not say it, it means that you don't have to wait. And then he discusses it in length, and he says, לעניין דינה, הדין דין אמת, דאין צריך להמתין בקידוש ליל שבועות עד שתחשך. The truth, the halacha is that one does not have to wait with the Kiddush of Erev Shavuot until nightfall, unlike what the Mas'ed Binyamin wrote. And if he rejects Mas'ed Binyamin, then anyone who relies on him, including the Magen Avraham and the Taz, and all the other Aharonim, even the Sephardic Aharonim, have nothing to base themselves on. And this proves that the minhag that my grandfather, great-grandfather, Chacham Shaul and Chacham Rabbi Daftaya followed, and the words of the Ya'abetz, Melamed Lo'il, Rabbi Ephraim Laniado, the Binyan Tzion, all these poskim who say not only you're allowed to pray Arvit and to do the Kiddush early on Erev Shavuot, but it's a mitzvah. And those of you who have a choice, not everybody has a choice. Sometimes there are some people in shul who would yell even at the rabbi, even at me, and would say, oh, we can't do it. We have to do it late. Everybody says you need to do it late. I don't argue. I don't want to have, shalom is more important. But if wherever you live, in your community or at your home, you could do it early, your choice, definitely you're allowed, and it's a mitzvah to do so. And if you decide to do it late, you have to really consider and make sure that no one is harmed by it. No one who has to delay to go to sleep late or not be able to learn or something else that will be disrupted, because we always have to make sure that everybody can enjoy the observance of the mitzvot and the halakha. May you have a wonderful Chag HaShavuot with peace and harmony, and enjoy your seudah and your tefillah and your limud. Cheni ratzon v'nomar. Amen.